there are lots of discussions like this going on regarding how to operationalize Article 6 and what is waiting for us as carbon professionals in the near future regarding the implementation, real implementation of ITMO transactions, which were initially started by Switzerland government, for example, under the facilitation of Click Foundation, but we are sure that there will be more of transactions on the track regarding the new emission reduction trading mechanisms. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to also introduce that this event is being hosted by Enking International, which is one of the largest carbon credits supplier in the world. So I would like to thank you, our Managing Director and CEO, Manish Tapkara, which is also here with us, for giving us this opportunity along with Turkish government. So I would like to start introducing our speakers before starting the technical dialogues. Then we will be listening more of Article 6 discussions in the coming minutes. So we have Misha Klassen from Click Foundation from Switzerland, and we have also Hugh Salway from Gold Standard, one of the most well-known carbon credit supplying standards in the world for years. And also we have a Global Carbon Council with a representation of Mr. Kishore. Welcome, Mr. Kishore. And sorry for giving your name incorrectly, but we will be correcting the same. I mean, there is always some mistakes in this kind of events. I hope that it is fine with you. And also we have Stefano De Clara from International Carbon Action Partnership. I have to say that I have been following him for a quite while, and I really admire him, and I am really happy to host you here with us. And also we have Stefan Donofrio from Forestry and Ecosystem Marketplace. They are doing amazing job regarding the giving views of actual voluntary carbon transactions in terms of an institutional perception. So we will be also listening his speech in this regard today as well. And also finally, we have Gilles Dufresne from Carbon Market Watch. He is going to introduce the NGO perception of the Article 6 operationalization, along with the other criticizing issues, hopefully. But I hope that he will outline his topics even better than any of us. So I don't want to take too much of your time, and I would like to immediately jump into the technical details. So we are going forward with Mr. Misha Klassen. Misha, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay, so it is. So thank you very much. So thank you for having the opportunity to speak here, and I will be very concrete on Article 6. And unfortunately, my colleague, Veronika Elgaard from the Swiss government could not make it. And she would have, I mean, presented the governmental part, and this would be important because the Click Foundation is ultimately acting as a regulee in the context of the Swiss law, and we are closely working with the Swiss government together, but we are not the government. We are basically a regulee under the Swiss law, and jointly, it's a division of role, and Veronika could have discussed about what bilateral agreement, which is in the center of the Swiss Article 6 strategy, works. I cannot talk about it. I don't have the standing, but I nevertheless will give a few words on that. So, exactly. Yeah, there is the slide for me. So Click Foundation, as is introduced already, we are an organization that delivers the compliance of the Swiss motor fuel importers and, that are obliged under the Swiss law to compensate or offset part of the fuel emissions or the emissions resulted in the transport sector. We expect to be required by up to 2030 to acquire in the order of magnitude 20 to 40 million tons of CO2 equivalents ITMOs, and this exclusively under the bilateral agreements 6.2 between Switzerland and the origination country, or eventually in a future multilateral mechanism. We, since 2 years, run procurements, call for proposals. We have an open call in Peru and Ghana already to submit ideas for mitigation activities. And we also do top-down development of designs, for example, in Ghana and Georgia. Where are we now? After 2 years, we have received almost 80 programs, of which now 22 programs in principle are pre-selected, so got the clearance from the board to spend money on the development. And we have 11 programs that are currently actually being on the development. Development means the development of the, sorry, I get, oh, that one. Good, thank you very much. I'm not too acquainted with that. Excellent. So the development document, or the design documents are basically the blueprint. It's like the PDD that the authorization will refer to. Now, we're mostly in Africa located in terms of activities. So what are the requirements? The requirements for the mitigation activities are clearly set out in both the domestic legislations from the country, Switzerland, and the partner country, but also, of course, in the bilateral agreement. Bilateral agreement provides clearly for a very strong role to ensure that the activities are in line with social development, human rights, and environmental integrity are in the center stage of the agreement. Also, fossil fuel lock-in is enshrined there. And very important is that there is no overselling, so that the activities, they remain within the scope of the MRV of the NDC, but are located beyond the ambition of the country itself to reach its NDC. So in brief, it could be activities that are too expensive or part of instruments that would not be required to meet the goal and would be outside of what a country would deem as appropriate to reach its NDCs. It's definitely not the low-hanging fruits we're after. For example, that also would mean that large-scale grid-connected renewable energy that could be deemed as, in principle, commercially viable are not what we are after. We would be rather into the small-scale off-grid decentralized part of the strategy. Now, all these requirements imply basically from countries that they are very conscious and responsible on authorizing activities. And this also means that they need to have a decision capacity on a political level, not only to initiate and lead the negotiation themselves on the bilateral agreement, but also to do the actual authorizations of activities that would translate into a registration under the CDM, but an authorization is much more because it involves a conscious decision from the government whether or not this fits into the priorities of the country and whether or not it is posing a risk of overselling. It also means that this body needs a political mandate from the parliament or from the minister. In most or many cases, this is already there. But it also can be very light in the beginning and ad hoc. Now, I was asked what would be the steps concretely with Turkey to go ahead in Article 6 cooperation, and I can speak for Switzerland. So that would be that there is an informal dialogue or an informal exchange initiated that leads into a formal dialogue with a political mandate to engage in negotiations. That's the typical way forward. As soon as possible, if it would be my wish, and that the country is providing a clear view on what are the technologies and measures that it intends to follow up in order to reach its Paris pledges, its NDC, and what technologies will be open for support under Article 6, but also under climate finance. And another pragmatic, very first step would be to appoint a body to coordinate the operationalization with the required decision power to go ahead with all kind of questions that come to the fore, strategic, tactical, and also political to be resolved. With that, I close and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Misha, for giving a brief outline regarding the existing application of Article 6 and IDMO deals. So I hope that we are going to have another deal in Turkey soon, and you can be sure that I will be, following up this process. And from here, I would like to, recall our representatives from ministerial part to take our, needful actions onto design a new bilateral agreement. So thank you. It was a great discussion to hear. Now we are going forward with gold standard. I mean, if you follow football, there is a saying that being Haji and being Alex, and gold standard is probably one of the, Hajis and Alexes in the carbon sector. So representing a gold standard, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hussal Bey. So floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. I don't know what that meant, but I'm hoping it was hugely complimentary about us. Hi, everyone. My name is Hugh Salway. I'm head of environmental markets at Gold Standard, which is one of the standards that has primarily served the voluntary carbon market for nearly 20 years now, and has a real emphasis on ensuring the highest integrity in carbon markets and also the promotion of sustainable development through projects. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about our view and our work across Article 6 as a whole, but in particular, what we see this meaning for the voluntary carbon market and the voluntary market as it moves forward over the next decade. I just wanted to start here, and there are many different examples of this over the past few weeks. It feels like there's a lot of different analyses which come out with different results in terms of where we are in terms of our progress towards the 1.5 degree target. And they all say slightly different things, but what they all say is we're not there yet. And that's why I think there is an incredibly important role for voluntary action, because within NDCs, we are currently off track from where we need to be. And so there is an important work, an important role and important work that companies can play in promoting and driving action which goes above what is committed to under NDCs. So I think that's the starting point for us when we look at this. We do see an important role for the voluntary carbon market in achieving the Paris goals. And just directly coming towards Article 6, I think Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement is often seen as the government to government part of the Paris Agreement, so for bilateral agreements. And that is the case when it comes to Switzerland and the bilateral agreements is got with other countries and others as well who are moving this forward. But what Article 6.2 essentially does is provides a framework for accounting. So making sure that units which are transferred for use by others are accounted for appropriately. And at the bottom here with an arrow in red, you can see that that applies not just to mitigation outcomes transferred from one country to another, it also applies for mitigation used for international mitigation purposes other than achieving the NDC and for other purposes, including as determined by the party. And what that means in practice is that there is a role for mitigation transferred under Article 6 to be used in the voluntary carbon market. And I think it's important for us to remember that Article 6 isn't just about transfers between NDCs. There's a role here for bringing voluntary action within the scope of what we're trying to do overall under Article 6 and using markets to support greater ambition under Paris. And when it comes to the role of the voluntary carbon market and the use of carbon credits by companies or by individuals, I mean, we really see there being two different routes that you can go. One is towards NDC. So there are credits which are purchased, which are counted towards the NDC of the country where they take place. They're not authorized under Article 6. And what the end buyer is doing there is they're supporting NDC achievement. And that's a good thing. And then the second step is beyond NDC. And that's where we have credits which are authorized under Article 6 and they're adjusted for by the host country. And what the buyer is doing there is they are supporting action which goes above and beyond the NDC of the country and above and beyond NDCs as a whole. And that's a way in which the gap towards 1.5 degrees can be narrowed. And the distinction between these two isn't just about whether action is towards NDCs or whether it's beyond the NDCs. It also matters, in our view, for what you can say as a company. So if you're supporting action which goes beyond the NDC, we think there's a more credible claim that you can make that your emissions have been offset, that you can be sure that what you're supporting is additional to what would have otherwise taken place, which is less clear if this happens towards the NDC. And this is one of the issues which I think there's been lots of discussion on over the past year. But these are the two broad places where we see there being possibilities for the voluntary market to act. And we think that we'll see both of them moving forward. And for us in Gold Standard, we thought a lot about the role that we will play when it comes to Article 6. And this in a way tries to reflect what we saw on the last slide. And I think what we're trying to say here is in a very similar way, actually, to what the Task Force on Scaling the Voluntary Carbon Market said earlier on this year. Every single carbon credit must meet certain core quality principles in order to be sold onto the market. And that means that every carbon credit should have additionality, ensure permanence, leakage must be avoided. For us, sustainable development must be part of that as well. But then we see there being a distinction as we move forward between whether credits have been authorized and will be used under Article 6 or whether they haven't. And what that will mean in practice is it will determine how these credits can be used in the market. So if there's no authorization, a credit can't be used towards another country's NDC. But if there is an authorization, it can be used towards a country's NDC. It will be eligible for CORSIA as we understand it, and it could be used in the voluntary market for more credible offsetting claims. And so what we're trying to say here, I think, and what I think will be a difference that we see in the future is we don't see there being a difference between the voluntary market and compliance market in the way we've seen before. I think we see a difference between whether activity runs under Article 6 or whether it doesn't and is counted towards the country's NDC. And so this is how we think that things will move forward. And this is what we're preparing for in our system. So all of our credits will meet certain criteria, but then within our system, you will be able to see and you'll be able to track whether credits are authorized under Article 6, whether they've been adjusted for. And that will be a distinction that we have. And then over the past year, so in February, we published a consultation which was looking at how to align gold standard projects with the Paris Agreement. And the issue which I've just talked about there about whether or not a credit is authorized under Article 6, whether it's adjusted for, is one part of that. But there are other parts of moving into the Paris context that are important too. We need to look at whether current approaches to additionality makes sense, and how we think about the fact that all countries now have NDCs, all countries have policies in place to meet those NDCs, and making sure that we're really testing additionality in the right way, for instance, looking at the way that baselines are set, and looking at other elements to make sure that what we have in place at the moment is consistent with Paris. And this isn't something that gets introduced kind of on day one after Article 6 gets adopted, but it's something that needs to be kind of integrated. And we're looking at the transition towards this. And we have set up a working group within Gold Standard of experts from outside who are helping us with this. So we want to hear from project developers, from practitioners, from those who are thinking very much about this to make sure that we're getting this right and that we have credits which work well in the Paris context, that are aligned with Paris, and that continue to represent the highest levels of integrity in this new framework. And the role that we have really as Gold Standard, or the role that we see us having, is as a facilitator. So there are host countries that want to authorize activity under Article 6. There are buyers who want to purchase adjusted units. That may be governments, it may be airlines, it may be voluntary buyers. And our role is really to be a facilitator in the middle to make sure that those who wish to buy those credits can buy them with confidence that they meet Paris line criteria, that they have been adjusted for, and they can clearly see that indicated in our registry. And we have a particular role, we think, to play in making sure that the alignment works well. But there's a role for others as well. So governments clearly have a huge role, and that's on the buyer side, but also on the host country side. And Misha talked a bit earlier about the different steps that we need to go through and making sure that host countries have in place the right procedures. And there's a lot that needs to happen on the capacity building side, and there's some support which is being provided there. And then there's the role for standards, which we've just talked about. And that's not something, I think, when it comes to Article 6 as a whole, which is unique to Gold Standard. I think all standards are thinking about this very seriously for whatever purpose they wish to be used. And then developers. And as we see this, we feel like there's a responsibility on our part to make sure that developers understand what this means in practice. And so over the course of next year, we are setting up an early movers program, which is our way to try to help Gold Standard project developers to understand how this will work in practice, to understand the requirements which we have in terms of letters of authorization, and to make sure that this can all go smoothly. Because I think that's what's key, is not to disrupt the way the market works now and how it worked in the past, but to make sure there is this smooth transition. So we see that as a responsibility that we have, but that others do as well. And then I think there is a real emphasis on this being something which we do together as a community, this transition. And there are solutions which we're trying to think of in Gold Standard which work well elsewhere, and we're trying to learn from what others are doing as well. And I think as we transition forward and we put in place new processes, we think about the types of claims that are appropriate in the Paris context. It's important that we do that together. And there's good initiatives which are being set up to try to do that. I'll pause for a second.
Yeah.
During your time at the conference, unless you are seated in a room with appropriate distance, while eating or drinking or are medically exempt. Thank you for your report.
I think I only had one line left to say, and he cut me off just before the end. And then the final thing is, as I said earlier, this isn't something which can happen overnight. There will be a need to transition towards a kind of new context under Paris. But the way that we see this is, that transition doesn't happen unless we all start now. And that's what we're trying to do in Gold Standard, to put in place the processes by which we can manage this, to provide the support, and to make sure this transition can happen as smoothly as we can allow it to. Because I think it's important for the integrity of what we're all trying to do through the voluntary carbon market that this aligns as soon as possible. So that's the work that we want to do, working with others. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, dear Hugh. So yes, as I had discussed, Gold Standard is one of the most well-known and experienced standards in the carbon industry, and it is very important to see their leadership especially considering the Article 6 operationalization. But we have also a new standard, a relatively new standard called Global Carbon Council. I mean, I would say that considering that we are doing this panel at Turkey Pavilion, nowadays everybody is talking about Global Carbon Council and its involvement to Corsia and the unbelievable increase, the registration interest increase to this standard in Turkey. So there is no doubt that Global Carbon Council will be also a very important market player, very important market actor actually. And I am sure that many of the others who can't attending COP physically today in Turkey is following this event just because of Kishor's involvement, Global Carbon Council's involvement to this panel. So Kishor, I would like to give you the floor. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So my topic, first of all, thank you very much to NKing International and Turkish Pavilion for having me here. And I'm delighted to talk on the whole very famous issue of double accounting of under Article 6 as well as under the voluntary carbon market. So go to the first slide, please. Oh, sorry. Okay, so just a couple of slides on the Global Carbon Council as such. The overall purpose of GCC program is to contribute to achieve Paris Agreement objectives and help raise ambition of the NDCs by making voluntary carbon market instruments available for the corporates and governments for low carbon and sustainable development. We are basically MENA region's first voluntary carbon market program. We are approved under COSIA. Our carbon credits would be used for the World Cup carbon neutrality in Qatar. We are based in Qatar, and we have also received a conditional approval under ICROA, International Carbon Reduction and Offsetting Alliance. We are developing our own methodologies, baseline monitoring methodology, as well as we allow the project participants to use the CDM methodologies for registering projects with us. We are registering projects from all over the world. We are receiving a lot of submissions from several countries listed over there. And we are not only issuing the ACCs, but also issuing the environmental no harm, social no harm, and contribution of the project to sustainable development goals in form of SDG plus labels and also the CORSIA labels. So the several projects which have been submitted to us are from renewable energy, energy efficiency, waste, and so on and so forth. Transport sector projects are also being discussed to be for the submission with us. Thank you. So we have the registry which has been operated by IHS Market, and we are expecting to issue about 20 million carbon credits in 2022. Already one issuance has happened, 2 projects are registered, and there are almost 45 submissions as on date, and many more are coming. We believe that by first quarter of 2022, we'll have about 120 to 150 submissions. And what I can say is that, yeah, we hopefully should be able to supply ITMOs in future as well. I mean, subject to how the 6.2 takes the shape in future. So on the topic of today, double accounting definition in the context of Paris Agreement is that the claim of same origin of emission reductions by 2 parties. Avoiding such double accounting, double claiming is critical for overall mitigation of global emissions under Paris Agreement. The corresponding adjustment is only defined in one place under Katowice package, and that is in the Article 13. So far, we don't have any official document other than Article 13 to talk about corresponding adjustment, because Article 6.2, 6.4 is under negotiation. So paragraph 77D2 of Article 13 says that each party that participates in cooperative approaches authorizes the use of mitigation outcome for international mitigation purposes other than the achievement of NDC shall also provide the following information. And it says an emission balance reflecting the level of anthropogenic emissions by sources and removals by sink covered by their NDC adjusted on the basis of corresponding adjustment undertaken by effecting an addition to ITMOs, first transferred or transferred. So our understanding is that the corresponding adjustment so far, any official document under Paris Agreement package, it talks about that it should be applied to ITMOs, which have been transferred between two parties under the cooperative approaches. So if I try to elaborate a bit, and if I try to make some possible interpretation of what will go in future in terms of authorization or endorsement of the projects to be supplied, which can supply the carbon credit out of the country. The purpose of authorization would be required to participation in international compliance climate market by a country, whereas endorsement by the country would be optional. Countries may choose to endorse voluntary carbon market claims. The function of authorization would be that it commits host country to corresponding adjustment. May contain the period of validity or specified volumes. The function of endorsement would be host country and acknowledges, endorses the activity, but does not commit to corresponding adjustment. And the implication of authorization is that transferred mitigation outcome is inside the scope of the host country's NDC and shall not be used for the host country's own NDC. And the implication of endorsement is that activity is consistent with inside the scope of the host country's NDC. What is not there yet, and the clarity on some aspects is not there across the globe, is that how to use the carbon credit by the user of by the buyer. There's no clarity on that yet, and we believe that the Integrity Council on Voluntary Carbon Market is working towards that to develop some buyer's guidance on this. Also, discussions are going on whether the project activity is inside or outside the NDC, how the sectors are defined in the NDC, whether based on the IPCC sectors or they are further elaborated into the steel or cement or manufacturing, whatever. So that also depends. This also depends on how the sectors are defined, and whether the corresponding adjustment applied to only mitigation activities covered by policies or measures under the NDC. This is still under negotiation. So there is a bracketed text you'll find under 6.2, and I will talk about that particularly. So this is sorry for the shabby design, but yeah, I tried to make some illustration here. I just take an example of a country's NDC to interpret what is the impact of the policy and measures of the NDC. Let's say this graph says on the x-axis the years from 21 to 23, and the carbon intensity on the y-axis. The green line, the red line shows you the sectoral baseline, and the green line shows that the emission reductions which will happen due to the NDC policy, assuming that the policy measure starts in 2025. But the yellow line that you can see, the emission reductions due to the sectoral GHG projects that are additional to the NDC policy. So if the project is implemented before the policy triggers in, so there is an additional project, the emission reductions which are taking place because of this. And let's say in this example, sectoral intensity, the carbon intensity to achieve is X% less as compared to the baseline year. Now, if you apply corresponding adjustment in this, so you can see that the shaded part, which I tried to draw, you will increase the emissions, the baseline by, let's say, Y%. That will change the baseline to a completely new level. And therefore, if you So this is the impact of the increase of the baseline by corresponding adjustment if it is applied before the policy triggers in. And therefore, towards the end, you will find that the actual carbon intensity, which is to be achieved, would be X minus Y. It will be less ambitious outcome if you trigger in the corresponding adjustment before actually the policy triggers in. So, of course, I'm in the hands of the expert as well, and I would like to invite the comments on that. But this is what we did analysis, that if you try to apply the corresponding adjustment before the policy triggers in, probably it is not going to be in the favor of the final outcome of the index. So what I'm trying to say here is that is my final slide, is that the corresponding adjustment must apply equally on both the sides, host party and the receiving party. This is very important because it has to be plus on one side, the minus on the other side. If host party receiving countries are same, the corresponding adjustment are not applicable because it is domestic transaction. It is clear that the host country GHG inventory is impacted by GHG project, but what about the receiving party? So on the receiving side, let's see, there could be several permutation and combinations. If the host country and receiving country are different, what receiving country can do with the voluntary credits? Can the country account or report the credits in GHG inventory through corresponding adjustment? No, unless there are ITMOs as per Article 13. Can buyers use it for internal compliance of NDC targets by actually reporting for lowering the carbon footprints? Not clear, because it depends upon the national policies whether they allow the external carbon credits to be used for the NDC compliance or not. So, and infrastructure must be ready to account for those credits. Can the buyer of voluntary carbon credits demonstrate their contribution to NDC of host country of GHG projects? Yes, they can. But can the buyer use for carbon neutrality of their products, services, or activities? And here is the issue, which is the most debatable point. In our view, yes, they can use it for the carbon neutrality of their product services because their reporting claims of low carbon footprint do not affect the national inventory, nor they affect the overall mitigation of global emissions. So if no accounting for national inventory at buyer side, the voluntary credits represent the voluntary action, and whether used to lower the carbon footprint or contribute to the country index. So therefore, in our view, the voluntary credit for the voluntary markets, corresponding adjustment are not necessary. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kishore. So it is very critical again because considering that Turkey's main issuance volume is coming from grid-connected renewable electricity industry, it seems that we will have several discussions both with Global Carbon Council and the Ministry to find a middle point, a common ground to solve this issue. But personally, I wouldn't, disagree that the double counting issue should not be on our priority. So we have to, prepare our voluntary carbon market industry in Turkey, like in the case of many other nations, accordingly. So the next speaker is coming from International Carbon Action Partnership, Stefano De Clara. And I would personally say that I have built my carbon literacy via the publications of ICAP, International Carbon Action Partnership. They are doing amazing jobs, amazing publications, and I would personally recommend you to, have a look at their websites. I mean, I would say that a true library is waiting for you to, get the fundamentals and follow the carbon actions around the world, especially the compliance market actions. But today, Stefano is going to discuss Article 6 cooperations, mostly focusing on the voluntary carbon market approach, if I am not wrong. But he will be explaining the same further, of course. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, the floor is yours, Stefano.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for the flattering introduction. So I've been at ICAP for a couple of months now, so I will not take too much credit for all the past publications, but I'll pass on your kind words to my colleagues. So in case you're not familiar with ICAP, we are a partnership of 39 different governments that basically get together to work on the implementation of emission trading systems around the world. So we have members from 4 different continents that are at different stages of implementing emission trading systems and operate emission trading systems at different levels of governance. So I'll be talking about Article 6 in international markets, pretty much from the vantage point of what that means for domestic emission trading systems, which is really ICAP's bread and butter. So I'll start by having a quick look at what is the current situation for emission trading systems globally. So we do have 24 emission trading systems currently in force across the globe, and many more that are either under planning and under implementation or are under consideration. It's worth noting that some of these systems have been around for quite some time. The oldest one is the UETS that was launched in 2005. Others obviously have been developed more recently, and these systems are also implemented at different levels of government. So, for example, the UETS is a regional system that operates across the European Union member states, plus 3 external partners. Some other systems are implemented at the national level. So, for example, the Chinese ETS, but you also find systems at the subnational levels. So, for example, in California and in Quebec, and even at the city level. For example, in Japan and in some of the Chinese cities. And another key characteristic that has to be kept in mind, especially when we think about how domestic emission trading systems can interact with Article 6, is that they can cover a wide range of different sectors, and different systems in different places do have different coverages. With that in mind, if we turn to look at what Article 6 could mean for domestic emission trading systems, we see that especially Article 6.2 can have a few different implications, and you can think about how Article 6.2 can be used in a few different ways. So you can have government-to-government agreements under Article 6.2, and this is pretty much what Misha talked about earlier on in the case of Switzerland and some partners. You can think about Article 6.2 as a way to generate carbon credits under issued by different independent standards, and this is really what you and Kishore talked about. And then you can also think about Article 6.2 as a way to link domestic carbon pricing policies, and especially link domestic emission trading systems. So it can really be a framework and a pathway to recognize international linkage, and also for countries to be able to claim the outcomes of those linking partnership towards their NDC achievement. And then next to Article 6.2, you obviously have Article 6.4, which is more straightforward because it mainly serves the purpose of creating a new centralized crediting mechanism that will be run under the UNFCCC auspices. So pretty much like a CDM that will work in the context of the Paris Agreement and in the context of all countries having NDCs. So looking more closely at linking, which is a key feature that is available to emission trading systems worldwide. So linking is a way to expand the coverage of a system across different jurisdictions and to promote international cooperation on carbon pricing. We do have a few examples of linking in operation already. So the UETS was effectively pretty much developed as a linked system from the outset. The same goes for RGGI in the northeast of the United States. The Tokyo and Saitama systems in Japan are linked. For example, Quebec and California are also linked. And more recently, the UETS linked with the Swiss ETS. So we do have a lot of experience on how linking can be implemented and has been implemented in the past. And going forward, Article 6.2 will be a framework to account for the outcomes of the linking partnership and to effectively enable countries to claim the outcomes of the linking agreement in case there is a net flow of mitigation outcomes from one system to another towards their NDC achievement. And this is pretty much one possible configuration of what you can do with Article 6 when you implement it in the context of an emission trading system. I will not go into this in detail, but there are a lot of different ways for a system to link. All the way from pre-linking incremental alignment, which is, for example, what Switzerland and the EU went through for almost a decade before the linking was finalized, all the way to a full linking with basically unrestricted full fungibility of units across the two systems. ICAP actually released a guide on linking emission trading systems a couple of years ago. So if you want to dig a bit deeper into this topic, I'll encourage you to go on our website and have a look at that. There are obviously benefits and risks to linking that has to be kept in mind when two jurisdictions start to discuss about the prospects for linking, and as they define the former and shape of their linking agreement. Again, I will not go into this in detail, but you'll find more information about this in the linking guide. And similar benefits and risks can also be thought about in the context of an offsetting mechanism, which is another key tool or key component to domestic emission trading system that different jurisdictions can decide to implement. Again, offsets means that in lieu of an allowance, so instead of like an allowance, you can use a credit that is generated and sourced outside of the system. This could happen domestically, so within the same jurisdictions in sectors that are not covered by the ETS, or it can also happen internationally and outside the jurisdiction. And this is where Article 6.2 and potentially Article 6.4 come in. So you can think about carbon credits in the future coming either from the Article 6.4 mechanism, ones that will be up and running and fully operational, or you can think about carbon credits being sourced to Article 6.2 from independent standards such as the gold standard, GCC, Verra, and others. And in this context, the whole discussion around corresponding adjustment is a bit more straightforward, because we know that given that these are meant to be used for compliance purposes, there will be the need of the application of a corresponding adjustment to back the carbon credits. And again, there are examples of countries that have adopted offsetting protocols, both in the past and at present. There's actually a quick overview of that on this slide. So different systems either can allow for no use of offsets. This is, for example, the case in the UETS as of this year. Offsets were allowed to some extent in the previous phase until last year. Some systems can decide to allow the use of domestic offsets, and you see some systems there. This is, most notably the case, for example, for California and Quebec. And some systems can decide to allow for the use of international offsets, or they can also allow for the use of both. So again, Korea is currently allowing for the use of international offsets, and that was the case for the EU ETS in the past. And another form of carbon pricing, so carbon taxes, can also be complemented by an offset protocol, either at the domestic or at the international level. And again, there are examples of that in Colombia, which allowed for international offsets for a bit, and now it's purely domestic offsets under the Colombian carbon tax, South Africa and British Columbia and Alberta. So in a way, Article 6.2, especially, but also Article 6.4, can make new tools available to emission trading systems if they want to use them, and if they want to complement their domestic system with an international offset protocol, for example, or with a linking agreement with a trading partner. And it's also worth noting that Article 6.2 and 6.4 might play an incremental role in the context of emission trading systems as we move down the decarbonization curve, and as we start to think about how emission trading systems can interact with carbon removals. So we all know that at some point there will be a need to balance leftover emissions and any emission that you still have under the emission trading system with an equal amount of removals in order to get to net zero. And we also know that removals are not fully equally distributed around the globe. So you might think about a configuration whereby emission trading systems do use market for removals. And on this slide, there are different models for how ETS and the market for removal can be integrated with each other. Again, I will not go into details on this, but we do have a report on this topic that we recently published. And again, removals can be sourced domestically if they are available in the same jurisdiction as where the ETS is operating, or could be sourced internationally through the Article 6 framework. And again, this might be an important pathway to explore going forward, as there will be the need to compensate any residual emissions with removals in the system. And I'll keep it to that, but I'm happy to take up any of this point in the discussion that we'll have later. And again, for more information, feel free to grab me after the event, or you can have a look at our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. It is really important to see that compliance market has a role to play in Article 6 transactions. But as Stefano also stated, it is very hard to design a very a working structure, very working mechanism that will dictate the trade, so-called ITMO trade between different compliance markets. But linking is a good practice as of now. I hope that it will enlighten the ways of compliance markets under the umbrella of Article 6 transactions, and also the use of offset credits in the compliance market is a very popular topic in Turkey, I would say. I mean, there will be some misunderstanding. I am continuously experiencing in the industry players, but still we would, expect to see some particular carbon offset projects will be playing roles in Article 6 transactions. So the next speech will be given by Stephen Donofrio, representing Ecosystem Marketplace, initiated by Forestry. So the floor is yours, Stephen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's great to be here today. We have a couple of slides here, but I'll try not to. There's a lot of text, a lot of data on the slides. So just to kind of give a quick little recap of what we've heard. We've heard from standards that have projects that are developed into registries. We've heard from kind of more of the climate policy perspective, and the work that we do with Ecosystem Marketplace is sort of to kind of track and weave through these different things. And the way that we execute this is through engaging directly with the project participants that would develop projects and list them with the Gold Standard or Global Carbon Council, Verra, and others, as well as intermediaries who are trading credits into the market to find end buyers, or sometimes to find another intermediary. And we've been Forest Trends is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. Ecosystem Marketplace was developed 16 years ago to do this work. So we've worked very closely with Gold Standard over the years as one example. Very excited to see the expansion of the offset market into other countries where we haven't seen a lot of offset activity through the GCC. But where we are, I'll talk about where we intersect with Article 6 in just a moment. But what we have amassed at this point is, as far as we know, the largest collection of market participants that report their confidential data of trades. So the trades of those credits that are developed, the individual credits, those prices and all the dynamics of those trades, including counterparty details, get reported into our system so that we can then help to translate that in terms of what projects are getting higher prices, what attributes such as biodiversity conservation or water or other things could help to influence, prices and the demand of those credits. But being able to kind of filter through all of those different details is incredibly important, especially, during times where we have this intersection between the independent voluntary markets and compliance markets. And so what we've started to do in this, because majority of our focus over the last 16 years has been in the voluntary market, is put together a partnership with the International Civil Aviation Organization. And the relevance of this is because with the CORSIA carbon offset program, we need to have a clear understanding about what the costs are for international aviation, and using carbon offsets. What are these prices, for these eligible credits, actually trading for? And that's information that governments can use and companies can use within those government jurisdictions to understand what compliance costs might look like. So in a similar way, as we look at Article 6 and the tracking of these markets as Article 6 potentially, we'll see what happens in the next few days, but assuming there is some sort of need for connectivity between the voluntary carbon offset market or compliance markets and governments and NDCs, we will need to know not only what are the projects and what are the emission reductions, but what are the prices, what are the actual costs associated with this, so that how does that get accounted for? Who claims ownership over the investment into these projects, and how can we help to support those discussions? So our database is now composed of thousands and thousands of trades that have been reported over the years, but projects that are located in 80 plus countries, 170 plus market participants. So we do our best to try to reach as many folks as possible. What I'm showing on the screen is actually, I would normally say it's hot off the press, but it's not even off the press yet, because the team is about to put out a bulletin today about this. But we've updated our data based on new trades reported to us just in the last month and a half, since we closed our reporting at the end of August, when we launched the first installment of our State of the Voluntary Markets report. So what's significant about this is that in September, when we launched our first installment of the year, we thought the voluntary carbon market was on track to hitting $1 billion and potentially exceeding that. We thought it would happen at the end of the year. We didn't think it would already happen. And we're already seeing that just from January 1 up until November 9th of this year, trades have shown that we are now above $1 billion in the voluntary market. This, we know, is not complete. We know there are some market participants that are still yet to report to us. Some do it on an annual cycle, which means we won't get their 2021 data until the start of next year. That's fine. But this is the first time that we've started to move beyond just the annual of give us your 2020 data if we're in 2021 to try to help the market see where we're moving as the market is moving so quickly. And just a couple of important highlights here. So the average weighted price has also jumped, as you can see, quite significantly from the first roughly 3/4 of the year, almost 3/4 of the year, from $3.13 to $4.73. These are global averages. So when we, again, going into individual project types, such as REDD+ from Peru versus a renewable energy project in India, these are priced differently. It doesn't mean that the quality or integrity is any different necessarily, but it means that there are different attributes that are influencing those prices. So this is just the global snapshot, high level numbers, which is important to just have that context. So this is the history of the market. As you can see, it's kind of gone from pre-2005, it's had ups and downs. We've seen different policy influences over the years, particularly coming from the United States myself, with end of 2000s, thinking that we might have a federal climate policy that would incorporate offsets. That didn't happen. So, but there's a difference between what has happened historically and what we feel is happening now, based on the surge of investment coming from investment banks, from speculators, from others investing in not only the transacting of projects, but the development of a significant supply of projects. This is taken from our report that we launched in September. So the 2021 market value number isn't updated fully, just as a disclaimer. But this is just showing the trend here taking place across the market. So again, taking maybe just one cut further down from those global numbers. This is in the report. It's free to download, take photos, but it is accessible and downloadable easily. And what you're kind of seeing here is based on what was reported up until August 31st, the breakdowns of the past from 2019 through that point in 2021. There's a lot here, but just to call it a couple of data points that I think are worth highlighting. Forestry and land use is been ticking up, and we've been seeing this mostly from a articulated interest and demand for these projects, and particularly as more and more projects are being developed with Indigenous people in mind, with other considerations to try to improve the integrity of these projects. Not only is the volume of forestry and land use projects exceeding any other project category now, but the prices are notably much higher on average. And again, these are global averages for these individual categories. So $4.73, that was as of August 31st, 2021, that has gone up, and I don't have those numbers yet for the updated numbers since then on the project category basis just yet, but that will be in the bulletin that's coming out later today. As you can see also then, the influence that has on the market value for forestry and land use projects, 544 million, compared to these other categories where the prices are lower, might have high volumes, but as a result, the dominance of the forestry and land use sector is worth paying attention to. And then there's other sectors that we can look at when we look at issuances and retirements that we see some interesting movement. Transportation, we're seeing a huge jump in issuances from the registries. We're also seeing the leading issuances are coming from forestry and land use, which this is not showing up here on this screen here, but that's where the registries like Gold Standard and Vera and GCC come in. They're helping to facilitate this future pipeline of projects. And I didn't hear it get discussed, but also what is happening with a lot of these registries is not only issuing a lot of credits, but issuing what are not necessarily considered carbon credits, but are forward credit units that can be traded and transacted and purchased for future net zero or compliance. And now let's go one just further down, down into these categories. These are not comprehensive, but a sample of some of the project types within those categories. So we have forestry and land use, renewable energy, energy efficiency and fuel switching, and agriculture. So again, pointing out how REDD+ these are the kind of those three columns are 2019, 2020, and 2021 through August 31st. And red plus in the forestry and land use category in terms of volume is outstripping the other project categories, project types within that category. However, afforestation, reforestation, while lower volumes, are achieving higher prices on average. And again, going across the board, we see this being really powerful information to try to get a much better handle on as this goes forward, to understand not only what types of projects, where these projects are located, which is also data that we have, and also where the demand is coming from for these individual projects with the project types and the location details. So that's all I wanted to share in terms of the data, but I think where we feel is what we're fearing is the strongest need for our data is that we need to have more specific details on the project IDs, which we've started doing this year, so that we can link it back and validate the trades to the registry data. We're also getting requests for more information about the cost of project development. So not only to know how they're selling, but product developers are coming to us saying, we know how much we're developing these projects for. We're not able to generate the credits. People need to have the understanding of how much it actually costs to develop these projects. And then I think there's probably two other key themes here, which is talking about integrity and quality of supply, and needing to make sure when we talk about that in terms of supply, we're differentiating the conversation in that sense from not comparing project type to project type, but more understanding within a particular project category, what are best practices and how do we ensure highest quality. And then also on the other side are the net zero and carbon neutrality and other claims that might influence the quality discussion or integrity discussion on the supply. And we need to keep these separate, but eventually they do come together because they can distort each other. You know, if the net zero goal is poorly constructed and they're buying high quality credits, it could look bad for the project developers of that project where those credits are coming from, and vice versa. So I think that's also part of the role that we're seeing, that we need to bring more clarity about the two ends of the market, help to bridge the information divide between what these net zero goals and carbon neutrality goals and how they're constructed, how they're pointing towards carbon offsets as a pathway to getting to their end goals. And we're starting to do that already. We have some research that we'll be coming out with pretty soon on that. But anyway, thanks for having me here today, and sorry to deviate from all the policy pieces of Article 6, but you know, this is really interesting to be a part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I mean, ecosystem marketplace is giving us the only, benchmark related study for years. And I will have a question, by the way, regarding this issue once the last speech is over. I am sure that our attendees will be addressing some similar questions to you. Thank you for all the statistics and doing amazing job. And you lastly mentioned that integrity is very important, very crucial. And when it comes to climate action or environmental action in general, discussing integrity is a very, very important, very much of importance. So in this respect, representing Carbon Market Watch, Gilles Dufresne is going to give his speech on the integrity of, reaching and addressing integrity in Article 6 of Paris Agreement. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is still awake and attentive after 5 PowerPoint presentations. I do have a 6th PowerPoint presentation, so please bear with me for a last one. I will try to make it as easy as possible. So going back to the question of the policy discussions that are taking place here in these corridors, in these rooms at this COP, and trying to regulate the future of carbon markets with a focus on what's happening under the Paris Agreement, but as previous speakers have indicated, with very serious and clear implications also for what private sector companies are doing. I'm here with Carbon Market Watch. So we are an NGO, a watchdog organization, as our name suggests. And we are doing really advocacy work to try to improve the transparency and integrity of carbon markets. And so what I want to talk to you about is what our vision is for Article 6 and what we think we need to get out of carbon markets in order to have a system that actually works. And I want to tell you the story of two possible worlds. Essentially, we have one world where carbon markets can function and can contribute to climate action. And we have another world where carbon markets will be detrimental to climate action. And I'm going to start with the positive one. I think we have carbon markets. They are established under the Paris Agreement. And so we need to try to make the best we can out of them. And we can use those systems to channel finance to projects, especially in developing countries that are in dire need of climate finance. There are good projects that are implemented under these systems, but at the same time, we need to ensure that they are not going to be used as a tool for greenwashing. So there is a positive element, there is hope, but there is also a massive risk in Article 6. There are numerous loopholes in the text, which some of you might have seen the last version of the text that was published this morning, which really keeps a lot of options still open. We are still facing the risk of lots of issues that I will discuss maybe on the next slide. But focusing on this one, I mean, this is, let's say, the more positive vision of what we want to get out of the system. We want to get a system that, first of all, not only reduces emissions, but actually contributes to sustainable development. This is in the name of the 6.4 mechanism. Some people refer to it as the sustainable development mechanism. This is not a system to just drive the cheapest, lowest abatement costs. This cost should be, these options, these lowest cost options should be tackled with ideally through the NDCs, through policies, through measures adopted by countries. The market should be set up to deliver high-hanging fruits. So the emission reductions, the mitigation potential that is harder to reach and where contributions from the private sector can be beneficial. So in this spirit, keeping in mind this idea of really contributing to sustainable development, we need a market that works for the people and for environment and not just for the climate. This means having clear safeguards and clear provisions to ensure the systems are protecting, promoting, and respecting human rights, and to have specific measures to ensure that people are consulted before projects are implemented, but also throughout the implementation of the projects. And this shouldn't be just like a tick the box exercise where you send a form to some community leader and then you can tick the box that you have consulted. There should be a clear process and a clear way of taking back that knowledge and taking back the feedback from those communities and building your project based on what can be useful for those communities. Another major improvement we need from past markets, from the markets we've had under the Kyoto Protocol, and notably the Clean Development Mechanism, the CDM, which is the largest system, is that we absolutely need a redress mechanism, a grievance mechanism. There was no way for communities affected negatively by projects established under the CDM to raise a complaint to the UN, to the CDM executive body or any other organization or body. We need this. There have been projects that have infringed on human rights. Some projects are displacing communities to make space for example, large hydro dams. This is not the case for all projects, of course, but there are projects. And one single project infringing on human rights is too many projects. So we absolutely need to have better safeguards, and we need to have this in the Article 6 regulation that might be adopted at this COP. Another point is on going beyond offsetting. This connects directly to this question of how credits are used and how especially private sector companies are using credits and whether they can be used simply to compensate your emissions. So you are emitting 1 ton, you buy a credit from somewhere else. You hope the credit really represents a full ton, and then at best you have emitted somewhere and reduced somewhere else, and you have a net zero, you have a zero-sum game. One of the provisions under the Paris Agreement says that the market has to deliver an overall mitigation in global emissions. It's an amazing acronym, OMGE, one more for carbon market people. And in order to deliver that, we need a specific system. We need to go beyond this logic of offsetting and just one-for-one compensation. One of the measures that's being proposed and that has been put forward and really promoted, among other by island countries and by many NGOs, is to say we need to cancel some of the credits that are being transitioned or transferred, sorry.
So every time you transfer credits or every time you issue credit, we can talk about at what point it's ideal to do that cancellation. You need to cancel some of the credits. So if you have a project that reduces 100 tons of CO2, you're actually going to generate only, let's say, 70 or 80 credits. And then these credits can be purchased to compensate emissions or for any other sort of claims. And in that way, you have actually these 20 or 30 tons for which you did not issue any credits. These are kind of extra, going to the atmosphere. You're not counting those, and you are delivering an overall reduction. You're not just like shifting emissions around. That's an important element for us. Third one, accounting for emissions properly. Now, this whole issue of double counting, I mean, maybe all of you are following carbon markets very closely. I'm talking regularly to people who don't follow this, and every time I try to explain double counting to them, they're like, why are you even working on this? Like, it just makes zero sense. Like, you're reducing 1 ton, then only one person should count it. And it does not matter if it's a country or a company or an individual. Double counting just does not make sense. If you have 1 ton reduced, you have one entity counting it. And we've heard 2 different perspectives on this from the voluntary market. One saying, well, you should apply indeed corresponding adjustments in all situations. And another one saying, well, actually for companies, it is fine to double count. I would strongly disagree with the second one. It is not acceptable for private sectors to make carbon neutrality claims based on emission reductions, which are already used by a country. If I'm going to take a completely random example. If you are reducing 1 ton of CO2 in Brazil, and Brazil says, thanks to this, I have met my NDC target, and then you have Shell that pays for that reduction and then says, thanks to this reduction, I am carbon neutral. You have 2 entities that are saying, I have effectively reduced emissions. One has reduced it in its territory, the other one has paid for it. But actually, you have only 1 ton that has been reduced. So if the country where the reduction has happened uses that reduction to meet its NDC, then the private company cannot claim this reduction in order to say they are carbon neutral or they are compensating their emissions. They should describe this finance contribution for what it is. It is a financial contribution. They are helping the country reach its NDC. And so they shouldn't make up some alternative description of what that is. The reality is they are helping the country meet its NDC. And in the draft text that we're seeing on Article 6, I think it is getting relatively clear that there is support for this, and that's all credits or units that are authorized for use towards other, well, in the text, it's another barbaric term called other international mitigation purposes, which essentially means anything other than an NDC. Even if you are using these credits for something other than NDC, you still need to apply corresponding adjustments. And that is in very important provisions that we need to maintain in the Article 6 text. So moving on to what this could look like if we don't have a good agreement. Obviously, these are all kind of the flip side of the things that I've just been talking about. We will risk having a system that continues accrediting projects and issuing credits to activities that do not benefit communities and at worst can actually have a negative impact on communities. We'll have a system that continues to promote and rely on the faulty logic of full compensation that does not drive extra reductions, and a system that opens the door to double counting. Double counting between countries under the Paris Agreement makes no sense from an accounting perspective, just the numbers do not add up. And double counting with the private sector makes no sense from a communication perspective, where the company is saying, I am net zero, I have compensated my emission. That is just simply not true. And so we need to regulate that. Some of you who are following this closely might know that Article 6 cannot actually regulate what the voluntary market does, because as the name suggests, the voluntary market is voluntary. So countries can agree whatever they want under Article 6. To a large extent, companies can still say, I don't care what you decide, I'm going to do whatever I want. And I'm still going to double count the emissions, for example. But it is very important to get a clear signal from countries that for those reductions that are accredited under the UN systems, these reductions cannot be double counted regardless of whether it's companies, individuals, countries, you name it. So again, the issue of double counting is really important. The last one I have not mentioned yet, which is here at the bottom right, claim old junk credits, relates to how we deal with old carbon markets. And again, perhaps some of you or many of you will have heard this debate around Article 6 of how do we deal with the clean development mechanism and also other credits and activities registered under the Kyoto Protocol. We have this market that was established under the Kyoto Protocol. It has not delivered on its promises for various reasons. The fact is many of the credits, a large majority of the credits generated under the CDM do not represent the climate impacts they are supposed to represent. They don't represent the full ton of CO2 reduced. And now we're in this discussion of, well, should we be allowed to use those credits to meet new targets? And I think that's hugely dangerous. First, because these credits are just junk credits, to be a bit blunt. They don't represent the climate impacts they're supposed to represent, but also because many of them are very old. And so I think beyond the question of the environmental integrity of the CDM, which is very important and the main focus of the discussion, we should also consider how sensible it is to meet an NDC target in 2025 or 2030 by using emission reductions, regardless of their quality, that were generated in 2013, 2014, reductions that were generated 10 or 15 years ago. I mean, for the atmospheres, this makes zero difference. That we're going to meet targets on paper with credits from many years ago, and this is not going to contribute to fighting climate change. So beyond this transition question, which is really important, we should not transition any single credit, and we should reassess every project before it's transitioned into the Paris Agreement. There's also a broader debate to be had about how do we set up a system so that we don't end up in the same situation. We are in this tricky situation today where we have a lot of supply from the past and we want to deal with it. How do we avoid having that in the future again? And I think considering expiration date on credits is something that really does, that would warrant an interesting discussion. I don't know if it should be, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe we can consider the pros and cons of various durations, but I do think there is value in making sure that we don't make claims and we don't make targets today based on reductions from 15 years ago. So these were my main points. I did have more slides, but given that you have seen a lot of slides already, I'm not really going to go through them. And I will just flag that, so these are the recommendations I insisted on here. Once more, no CDM credits should be carried over. We really need corresponding adjustments for all credits, regardless of whether it's for countries or for private sector use. We do require automatic partial cancellation, sorry for the typo there. And this is essentially what I was talking about earlier to deliver overall mitigation, going beyond just like zero-sum offsetting and actually canceling some of the credits. And then finally, we need, last but not least, we need safeguards. We need social and environmental safeguards. We need to make sure the system works for the planet, but also works for the people and for the nature. You can find all these recommendations also in our briefing with some more introductory explanations on what carbon markets are and how they work. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation and with several criticism at an end. And I think it is very important to have this dynamism regarding criticism of what we are doing as carbon market professionals. Thank you. It was very meaningful for us to have this discussion within the event. So we are done with the speeches, and I have noted several questions to each of our speakers, but I am not going to address mine at the first hand. I would like to ask our audiences if they have any questions for us, for our speakers, so that we can have a further discussion round before concluding the session. Yeah, the floor is yours now. Okay, yes, a question from that. Is it on?
Can you hear me? Yeah, yes. Okay, first of all, thank you all for your presentations. I do have a question, but it doesn't focus on one of your presentations. It's more about if you have an update on the ongoing negotiations of Article 6. It's quite hard to get some information, as you can imagine. How's the stand? Maybe somebody. can answer on that. It's a question to all of you.
Yes, any volunteer? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess everybody's trying to find out what's happening. As I mentioned, there was a new text published this morning, or overnight rather. It still very much includes a lot of the options, if not every option. So everything's still on the table in terms of double counting, CDM transition, overall mitigation. Some of the compromises that are being proposed continue to be more or less the same. So, for example, having vintage restrictions on CDM credits, so cutoff dates, having a progressive phase-in of corresponding adjustments, so allowing the issuance of credits without corresponding adjustments for a certain type, for certain areas for outside of NDC scope for a certain number of years. So I mean, as far as I'm aware, there are not major developments in terms of one option being kind of identified as a likely compromise. And as I understand, there was a ministerial consultation that was starting this morning. So ministers are starting to deal with it, which is probably where things are actually gonna move, right? Because the technical negotiators have been talking about this for a bit over 5 years. So it was not so expected that they would resolve any of the main issues in the first week either. But maybe others have more intel.
Maybe just adding on that a bit in terms of process, as Jules was saying, like there is still a lot of ground to be covered in the text before it gets to a compromise, and there's also quite a long way to go still before it is something that can be sent up to the higher level delegations that will take then the final decisions. And in COP terms, Wednesday of the second week is still relatively early to get a good sense of what the final outcome will be. So I think I think there are attempts at making compromises, or at least testing potential landing zones with different delegations. And I think there's a contact group today at some point where delegates will be able to discuss that further. I think beyond that point, I think we are likely to start entering into the phase where you start having bilateral conversations and small group conversations on aimed at trying to define what the other landing zones will be. So I think it will be interesting to see if things start to shape up along the same lines as in Madrid, where we knew what kind of compromises were being attempted, or if delegations are trying to be creative and come up with new potential compromises around the key issues that will likely still remain open after today and tomorrow. But yeah, we are starting to get into the interesting time for Article 6 at COP.
Perspective of a compliance buyer under the Swiss context, we do not expect to be affected that much from either outcome, because we are ultimately regulated under the Swiss law and Switzerland, and also the bilateral agreements, as I discussed. And here the standards are quite clear, and Article 6.2 is voluntary, and Switzerland as a voluntary participant to these bilateral agreements sets the right standards, so to say. And here we are quite close to CDM Watch with in terms of what we deem as required to provide for integrity in the transactions. So we are looking forward to the result, and our mandate will remain up until 2030 with 77D, as mentioned by Kishore, as a hook. So that's.
Please.
I think something on the the policies and measures, and there's a bracketed text which is very important from everybody's point of view. and it talks about, for example, whether the how to treat the policies and measures, and whether the outcomes which should be correspondingly adjusted should come from the mitigation activities which are covered in the policies or measures or not. So that is also a very big policy issue which is being discussed under Article 6.4. Again, I saw that there are, on the baselines particularly, there are different two options available: the average and the more ambitious benchmark. So average benchmark or ambitious benchmark. So many methodological as well as policy issues are still pending, and decisions are yet to be taken.
Yes, I think we are done. Yeah, we can have the second
Thank you.
question.
I'm so sorry I missed some of the presentations. I'm Giles Archibald, a councillor in local government here. Is there an argument for saying that we should ditch all of this? I mean, it really is. Carbon trading is a license to kill. You can pay money and you're able to then produce more carbon than you should be, and you can then kill people as a result of paying more money. You also don't pay anywhere near the environmental cost. So I'm just, and we are in such an emergency. The situation is so dire. Why would we give people this license? Particularly when the whole system, as has been shown by Carbon Watch, is filled with chamocracy and corruption. Why should we not just ditch the whole thing?
Any volunteer? Yeah. Mr. Kishore.
I'll try to respond this very, I would say, popular question. Everyone is asking about what is the role of carbon markets and what environmental integrity role that they are playing. I mean, I think that carbon offset comes at the end of the value chain of carbon neutrality. So when you want to have a net zero world, the first and foremost is measuring the emissions, then mitigating it as much as possible, and to the highest extent that you can mitigate them. And then at the end, whatever is unavoidable, what you cannot reduce, can be offset through carbon credits. So I completely agree with you that the mitigation comes first, but the offsetting comes at the end. But you cannot achieve in practical way a net zero world without offsets. So that's what my point is. Thank you.
Any other? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, I would nuance that answer slightly in the sense that I think you can reach a net zero world without offsets. Net zero does not imply you have to offset. It implies you have emissions somewhere and removal somewhere else, and you are balancing that out, which can happen ideally at a global level, perhaps at a country level, at a national level. It really depends. I mean, all countries don't have the same potential for removals, right? I don't think you need offsetting as a practice, and definitely the kind of reputational issues that the markets are suffering from today are in my view, well deserved. It does not mean that all projects implemented on the carbon markets are bad and that everyone involved in those systems is just in it for the money. I don't think that's the case. But there is definitely an issue that there are, in my view, a significant portion of credits that do not represent the benefits they are supposed to represent. And this is why, why we as an NGO choose to take an inside approach, and we do try to work within these markets, within these initiatives to improve the system. I do see the value in continuously challenging it from the outside and pushing it for more integrity, because this is what is ultimately driving the changes that we are seeing now, and driving the review of rules around additionality, around double counting. We do need to keep that pressure coming, and especially when it comes to private sector action. There is good private sector action. There are companies who are genuinely trying to see what is the best way for me to contribute climate finance. And on the other hand, you have the shells of this world, which are launching carbon neutral driving advertisement campaigns, which makes just no sense. But so I wouldn't kind of discredit the entire system, but I would totally support the idea that we're a long way from where we need to be.
I want to very quickly react as well.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the question of what we're doing and what we're not doing, because we cannot pick, we have to do it all, and carbon markets are part of it. And it's not a question of doing reductions first and offsetting later. We have to do it now. So it's part of it. And there are enough initiatives in place now to take care that environmental integrity will be part of it.
Just maybe to
Yes,
kind of jump in a little bit, and maybe
then we will have Misha after you.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. We can ask the question about, you know, what's the role of carbon credits, but not necessarily should they be a part of the climate solution. Those are two kind of different questions here, because if we look back over the last 26 COPs, or how back to 92. What has been the success of government policy and the UN policies, you know, to getting to the reductions that are needed. And so for us at Ecosystem, we don't take, you know, we don't get involved in the policy side or get involved in activism. We're trying to, you know, call out companies for a bad net zero goal. But what we do try to understand is what is the price on carbon that is being placed, and then how do other attributes, which are largely a part of the majority of the credits coming online, which are around biodiversity and water and other ecosystem service values, in addition to the carbon. So it's not solely about the carbon that we you know, try to focus on when we think about this. So I would encourage everybody, you know, in this conversation to think about the holistic approach to the different suite of solutions. And the woman that just spoke points out a very proper, you know, anecdote, which is that we have to move on everything now, an all-in approach, ensuring that integrity is there in the market, ensuring that we are reviewing credits and ensuring the highest quality of the standards and all the stakeholders involved. But carbon markets have historically been a source of innovation. They've financed technologies. They've enabled renewable energy in developed countries to now be cost effective and no longer eligible for carbon project development in developed countries. So if we forget and we lose track of the ability of the private sector to be involved through a market mechanism to drive climate innovation, I think that would be short-sighted and short-focused. So,
yes, Misha, maybe one of the final words can
famous
come from
final
you.
words. I just like to put the whole discussion a little bit into perspective. I mean, we are all discussing about Article 6, but ultimately it's about Article 13, the ratcheting up. Article 6 was negotiated and came in very at an early stage and almost didn't make it. So at the core of the Paris Agreement, it's the countries and their pledges and how they reach it. And Article 6 is only but kind of an overflow thing. And also if you look at the volumes that will be transacted between the markets in comparison of the effects of the domestic policies, you will have quite a difference. And I just want to put a little bit the right perspective on that. It's really about what the countries are doing, and the markets will not prevent them or prevent them from doing it, because this is enshrined in the NDCs. And working with countries, we see a very a clear consciousness about that. And Article 6 is a Paris Agreement thing and not a private market thing. And I think the discussion of articles or corresponding adjustment in the private market, voluntary market, is much more related to Article 13, how the countries are reporting their actions under Article 13 in taking into consideration actions that have been done under the voluntary market. And we have to be a little bit clearer on that.
And I think we are coming to end for our session, but before concluding the same, I would like to contribute my perception to this discussion as well. I think there are two pillars for main two pillars for market-based decarbonization. And the first pillar is, should be owned by the governments. I mean, governments has to take necessary precautions via the necessary finance, by the way, of course. And we should, make it happen for the solid and real emission reductions at place. But after that, the remaining one, we are still having some difficulties to, address some carbon intense sectors. We need carbon offsets, in my opinion. We have a very good mechanism as carbon offsetting on paper. Of course, we should improve the same in the coming years. But if there is something wrong, it shouldn't be on behalf of the carbon market mechanism itself. Everybody has its own responsibility, like governments, like carbon standards, like the other carbon market players, carbon market actors. Thank you for your attendance and your intense interest to our event. I mean, I have enjoyed very deeply, and I would like to thank my speakers representing several valuable organizations today here, and for their valuable discussions as well. You are always welcome at Turkey Pavilion for any COP. I hope that we can meet with you, dear audiences, in the coming events like COPs, like the other climate action events. Thank you. Thank you for everything. Sitting is fine, I think. Yeah. Easier. Yeah. Thank you.